Very pleased now to be joined here at SB Nation by the one and only, the internationally famous. You know him, you love him. It is Alex Smith. Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
First things first, when I interview somebody like you, I like to search through my own tweet history to see the things that I said. All complimentary, just to be clear.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But the very first one I had, I don't mean to dox anybody, but I tweeted in 2015 that I had just met your cousin. I don't know what led to that. I was living in San Antonio at the time, so I'm curious if that tracks for you, if you can, somewhat connect those dots for me.
I have family in San Antonio. Yep. So that would be correct. Yeah.
All right. Well, there we go. I can sleep tonight because I was able to kind of solve that equation. You and I were chatting on the Friday of the NFL draft. This isn't going out for a little bit, though. It's basically been a couple of days ago, the 20-year anniversary of you going number one overall. Have you had any time to reflect on that this week? Have a lot of people told you that? I imagine they have.
No, I mean, I every time draft comes around in the spring, for me, it brings back a lot of memories. I think it's inevitable. I'm still obviously a huge football fan. I still work for ESPN and cover the game. So, you can't help but see all the QB stories that are building up to the draft as they go through the workouts and the combine and this process. And then there really isn't anything like the NFL draft, right? To turn on the TV and see the spectacle that it is. And now it's so cool they're taking it on the road, Green Bay, Wisconsin. I mean, to see how many people were out and what it's turned into. Right. No other draft is like this. And for me, again, I grew up watching it. I grew up watching it, and I've been a football fan my entire life. And so for me to have taken part in it, it was so surreal and obviously changed my life. I'm 40 years old. It was literally, 20 years ago that I was drafted and taken first overall. And, it was a defining moment for me, again, to be you're on the cover of every newspaper in the country. The face of the franchise as a 20-year-old for the San Francisco 49ers, a organization steeped in legacy of quarterback play. And for me, again, as a 20-year-old trying to navigate that, it was something that I don't know how you could be prepared for, but certainly obviously changed my life, and never thought I would go on to have a 16-year career, and just kind of obviously incredibly lucky in so many ways.
Yeah, I think that's some really great life perspective. Obviously, you're talking about how it relates to your own profession, in the NFL, but I think that it's applicable to any walk of life in various ways. It's an exclusive club, obviously being the number one overall pick, and there's different pressure. Some of that is dependent upon the market that you go to and the legacy and the shadows that you're kind of fighting. I cover the Dallas Cowboys, which definitely means that all of my tweets about you have been complimentary, obviously, during your days in San Francisco and Washington. And I recall this past season, you had a lot to say about the Cowboys in ways that I agree with, to be clear. And I think when people look at your career, they look at you as somebody who was, I don't want to say a late bloomer, but somebody who was able to continually have success at different points and maybe have more success later. I think people look at a quarterback and presume that if they don't have success right away, that it's just never going to happen. Yeah. But you're a great example of just continuing to thrive, sometimes in different locations. And we hear every year when someone gets a little bit older about Peyton Manning and how it took him forever to win his first Super Bowl. Dak Prescott's kind of in that awkward territory. He's the longest tenured starting quarterback in the NFL, and it hasn't happened. You've been complimentary of him. I'm curious, you mentioned you cover the league, obviously, what your thoughts are. We're a morning removed from the Cowboys giving him help along the offensive line. You have to be able to relate to Dak on some level, given the burden of fame and notoriety and pressure that you talked about being in San Francisco. It's a little bit different being in Dallas and being the Cowboys quarterback. I'm just curious for your thoughts on Dak overall.
Okay, first off, I'm a huge Dak fan. I think he's an awesome player. So good. I think, listen, there's a whole nother level. There's tiers to all of this, right? And I think being the starting quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys is in a tier of its own. And what comes with that, and to see how Dak has handled that as the human being that he is, let alone obviously what an outstanding football player he is. I think, I love everything about him and his game and who he is and how he's handled himself. Obviously, in the face of some tough situations, especially this last year in the contract negotiation, and just I wasn't surprised the kind of character that he has shown up, throughout his life, but. It's hard. They didn't go get a lot of help last year, right? So much of that offense a couple of years ran through CeeDee Lamb. And in the NFL, defenses are too good to take away one guy, right? Like, you just have to be multidimensional. You have to be balanced. that running game was lacking last season. There just wasn't enough help outside of there. Certainly, they had a lot of turnover on their offensive line as well. And then you lose Dan Quinn, one of the best defensive minds in football, right? So this was a defense that, I think the 3 years prior had led the NFL in turnovers and takeaways. And then all of a sudden that kind of dries up as well. So there was a lot going on. And I think one of the things as a quarterback, when you play long enough, and Dak certainly knows this, listen, you get way too much credit for wins, but you're certainly going to get your share of the blame when it doesn't go right and you're losing. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was a time for the Cowboys. Yeah, a little bit of a reset. I think that always happens too with the nature of the cap, and you're balancing these contracts, and certainly they just had some big ones in the last couple of years, and I think they're getting ready for some other ones down the line, obviously with Micah. So it's a juggling act. You only have so much, you only have so much to allocate, and you got to make it work. And I think when you do have some of these big contracts, you really do have to hit in the draft. And so to come back to last night and here this weekend, the Cowboys need to execute, right? And only time will tell. I think that's the funny thing as we evaluate these drafts. I know all the prognosticators love to grade these guys instantly on these draft choices, but really we have to take a look. What to come back to this year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now to see how a lot of this plays out.
Yeah, I recall when Dak signed his first extension in 2021. He was obviously coming off the ankle injury, and in his press conference, he thanked a lot of people, but he shouted you out. And obviously, your recovery is really, really well known and really well documented, and what you went through and how you persevered. Yeah. And I mean, it remains an incredible story. The E60 on you was very powerful, and it seems like, I hate to cast an enormously wide blanket, but medicine has just become an important part of your life and overall health and wellness. And I understand that you're working on Vertex or something with Vertex Pharmaceuticals that sort of falls in line with that overall disposition.
Yeah, man, I am. And you said it, obviously, like life comes at you and I felt like I was on top of the world, and you're 14 years in the NFL and peak health. And wham, all of a sudden, again, I break my leg, and infection, and it sets me down this multiple year road of recovery and surgeries, and 20 surgeries, and moving body parts on my body to save my leg, and obviously dealing with amputation, and for a long time I was in the hospital, and septic, and trying to save my life. So it's become my new reality and my new norm, and for me, I do love sharing and being open about it. And a big part of what I do love is so much focus is always on the physical, and so much of my recovery, in fact, was on the mental side. And partnering with Vertex is why I'm so proud, because a lot of this, I was in pain for a long time, and dealing with pain. And it's a hard conversation in this country right now, and has been historically. There haven't been a lot of great options. It's a conversation that oftentimes didn't even take place. I mean, I'll never forget when I got discharged from the hospital, and handed, as I go home, my wife and I, scared to death, handed bags of medicines with written instructions and a rescue medication, right? And not knowing how to manage and balance any of that. And yet for me, obviously, a reality of where I was at, with a steel cage bolted to my leg and still looking at surgeries ahead of me, pain management was a reality that I needed to deal with. How was I going to sleep at night? How was I going to get out of bed in the morning, right? How was I going to engage with the world, my family, my friends, my community? How was I going to recover if I couldn't manage that pain? And again, these are conversations that, like, if I could go back, I wish I could have. They just don't take place. And that was kind of the nature of again, pain management. Luckily, things have changed. I mean, I wish some of the stuff that is out was around when I was going through this. And so for me, it's about partnering with Vertex to encourage people. One, listen, pain is universal, right? Like it's something that's not if, but when it's going to happen. It is part of the human experience, and encouraging people to have these conversations. Again, I think we all understand how hard these have been. I felt guilty at times as a patient asking for relief when I was dealing with pain, and it doesn't have to be that way. Right. Again, this is something we all deal with. And so encouraging everybody out there, anybody dealing with it, start these conversations, have them. You steer this. It is so personal to you. And so speak up. Again, have these conversations with your care team, with your doctors. For anybody out there looking for help, go to paingameplan.com. There's a bunch of resources on there to help you navigate really hard situations. Because again, for me, I'll never forget. I mean, it clouds everything in your life. Like when you're dealing with pain, everything becomes secondary. Again, I was a worse husband and father and teammate and community member, right? Like when you're dealing with this, it's just is so hard. And so it doesn't have to be that way. And so really proud to partner with Vertex and try to spread the word on this.
I think that's really well said. The kind of in your case specifically, everyone sees the pictures, and you talked about the steel cage. My son spent 2 months in the NICU. He was born premature, and I'll never forget. Right upon discharge, we had to take this class on how to like administer CPR if he had choked, at home. And I mean, I think everyone goes to this when you leave the hospital with a baby, but I remember thinking like, okay, like this was the last thing that, it was just an enormous amount of pressure. And like, again, not apples to apples in terms of the bag of medication you had and things like that. But I remember being incredibly overwhelmed. And in a situation like that, I had my wife who's incredible, but there is a non-obvious element to these sorts of things in life. And I think it's really noble that you're sort of, establishing that there shouldn't be a neon sign that has to be blared. It should be incredibly normal to have these types of conversations.
Totally. And to your point again, like it happens to all of us. These things come along. And I'm sure there was, for my wife, it was like the same thing. Like, again, you get handed this all these medications, and certainly a lot of them were opiates at that point. And then this rescue medication. And for her, scared to death. I mean, I think we've all heard horror stories of potential side effects and addiction related to some of these medications. And so, again, scared to death. And then I'm at home and I'm dealing with pain. And then you're even feeling guilty asking your wife, right, who at that point was my caretaker in so many ways. And so it just was hard. It was really hard. And again, no one necessarily there to help us manage that. And that was just kind of the nature of things. And so, so happy that there are more options out there, right? And again, encouraging people to have these conversations proactively.
My last football one for you, Alex. I'm an Arizona State Sun Devil, and you obviously cover the NFL, but I imagine you obviously keep your tabs on the college game. And Arizona State Big 12 champs. It was super awesome last year, and things sort of blossomed as the season went along. But the Utah win was the first like, holy crap, you know what I mean? And so I'm just curious. I say this with great love for my school, but what it's like to feel like the kingmaker for someone else. And I think you probably felt that individually. When I imagine when someone gets an interception off the #1 overall pick, right? Like you've probably experienced that in different ways in life, but it's got to suck. And I hope it did, if I'm being quite honest with you.
It did. And, I did quickly convert as Utah's season, started to go downhill a little bit last year. I quickly converted to a Sun Devil fan, representing, obviously, I'm a West Coast kid and then representing the Big 12. And I just thought they were a ton of fun.
Right.
Obviously, Cam Scadaboo kind of embodied that, the way he played and his style. But I thought they were, the head coach, the quarterback, just fun to watch. Obviously, they played really, really well and had an unbelievable season. Hopefully, the Utes bounce back and get revenge. So there's always next year. But again, obviously, as a West Coaster, was rooting for him as well.
Look, I came into today wanting to talk trash about Arizona State to Alex Smith, and I accomplished that, and I solved the great mystery of understanding your family in the San Antonio area from a long time ago. Alex, you're doing fantastic work. Keep it up relative to spreading the good word relative to Vertex, and obviously covering the NFL. You do a fantastic job every week. I wish you health, wealth, and happiness, and enjoy the rest of the year.
Same. Thanks so much, man.